The modern world is a relentless storm of information, expectations, and unpredictable change. For many, this environment creates a state of perpetual emotional turbulence. We find ourselves at the mercy of our moods, reacting to minor inconveniences with disproportionate frustration and allowing the opinions of others to dictate our self-worth. However, there is a different way to live. Emotional strength is not a trait you are born with, it is a discipline you develop. It is the art of emotional sovereignty, the ability to remain the master of your internal world regardless of the chaos unfolding in the external one. To be emotionally strong is to understand the mechanics of your own mind. It is the realization that while you cannot always control what happens to you, you have absolute authority over how you interpret those events. Most people live in a stimulus-response loop. Something happens, and they react instantly. Emotional strength introduces a gap into that loop. In that gap lies your freedom. It is the space where you decide to be calm instead of angry, patient instead of anxious, and resilient instead of defeated. This audiobook is designed to help you widen that gap until it becomes your natural state of being. We often mistake emotional strength for emotional suppression. We imagine a strong person as someone who is stone cold or unfeeling. This is a dangerous misconception. Suppression is like holding a pressurized lid on a boiling pot. Eventually, the pressure becomes too great, and the result is an explosive breakdown or chronic burnout. True strength is about integration and regulation. It is about having the courage to feel your emotions deeply without letting them drive the vehicle of your life. It is the transition from being a victim of your feelings to becoming an informed observer of them. Education is the first step in this transformation. By educating yourself on the specific habits, psychological shifts, and philosophical frameworks that govern emotional resilience, you begin to rewire your brain's default settings. You move from a fragile state, where your peace is easily shattered, to a hardened state, where you can absorb the shocks of life and use them as fuel for growth. This process requires radical honesty and consistent practice. You will be challenged to look at your shadow side, your triggers, and your habitual excuses. In the chapters that follow, we will break down the 10 essential habits that form the pillar of an unbreakable mind. We will explore the power of the pause, the necessity of radical acceptance, and the discipline of cognitive reframing. We will discuss how to build an identity that isn't shaken by failure and how to set boundaries that protect your mental energy like a fortress. This is more than just a collection of tips, it is a comprehensive system for psychological endurance. By the end of this guide, you will possess the tools to navigate any crisis with equanimity and purpose. Your emotions will no longer be your master, they will be your greatest allies in the pursuit of a meaningful life. Chapter 1: The Power of the Pause, Mastering the Space Between Stimulus and Response. The fundamental difference between an emotionally reactive person and an emotionally strong person can be measured in seconds. For the average person, life is a series of immediate, unthinking reactions. If a colleague offers a critique of their work, they feel an instant surge of defensiveness. If a partner forgets an important date, they feel an immediate wave of hurt or anger. If a stranger is rude in line at a grocery store, they feel an instantaneous flash of irritation. In these moments, there is no gap. The stimulus happens, and the response follows it like a shadow. This reflexive way of living means that you are essentially a puppet, and the world holds all the strings. To become emotionally strong, you must learn to cut those strings. You must master the power of the pause. The pause is the intentional creation of space between what happens to you and what you do about it. It is the realization that while you cannot control the initial spark of an emotion, you have absolute authority over whether that spark turns into a wildfire or is simply observed and allowed to fade. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor who endured the unimaginable conditions of Nazi concentration camps, famously noted that between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. If a man in a death camp could find that space, we can certainly find it in the frustrations of our daily modern lives. To understand why the pause is so difficult, we must look at the biological reality of the human brain. We are equipped with an ancient survival mechanism known as the amygdala. This almond-shaped part of the brain is responsible for the fight, flight, or freeze response. Its job is to scan the environment for threats. Thousands of years ago, if a predator lunged at you, you didn't need to pause and reflect, you needed to run or fight instantly. However, in the 21st century, the amygdala cannot distinguish between a saber-toothed tiger and a condescending comment from a boss. It treats both as existential threats, flooding your system with cortisol and adrenaline. This amygdala hijack bypasses the prefrontal cortex, the logical reasoning part of your brain. When you are hijacked, you aren't thinking, you are reacting from a place of primal fear or rage. The habit of the pause is the manual override for this biological hijack. By intentionally stopping for even 5 to 10 seconds, you allow the physiological smoke to clear. You give your prefrontal cortex the time it needs to come back online and assess the situation rationally. During those few seconds, the chemical surge of the emotion begins to dissipate. If you can wait out the first 90 seconds of an emotional wave without acting on it, the physical intensity of that emotion will naturally decrease. The pause is not about stopping the feeling, it is about refusing to let the feeling dictate the next move. Practicing the pause begins with physical awareness. Emotions are not just mental states, they are physical events. Long before you realize you are angry in your mind, your body has already sent out the signals. Your heart rate increases, your jaw clenches, your chest tightens, or your face flushes. Emotionally strong individuals are highly tuned into these early warning systems. They don't wait until they are shouting to realize they are upset. They feel the slight tension in their shoulders and recognize it as a signal to pause. They use the body as an anchor to the present moment. One of the most effective techniques to implement the pause is the stop, breath, label method. When you feel a trigger, you mentally yell stop. This breaks the momentum of the reaction. Next, you take one deep, diaphragmatic breath. This sends a signal to your nervous system that you are safe, physically de-escalating the fight or flight response. Finally, you label the emotion. You say to yourself, I am experiencing the feeling of frustration. Note the phrasing, you are not saying I am frustrated, which implies the emotion is your identity. You are saying I am experiencing frustration, which positions you as the observer. This simple shift in language creates a psychological distance that makes the emotion much easier to manage. As you develop this habit, you will find that the pause allows you to ask a critical, life-changing question: is this reaction useful? Most of our emotional outbursts are not useful. They don't solve the problem, they don't improve our relationships, and they don't make us feel better in the long run. They are simply discharges of energy. In the pause, you can evaluate your options. You can decide if the situation requires a firm boundary, a calm explanation, or perhaps no response at all. Often, the most powerful response to a provocation is silence. Silence is the ultimate expression of the pause. It demonstrates to yourself and to others that you are not easily moved from your center. However, mastering the pause is not a one-time event, it is a muscle that must be trained through voluntary discomfort. You can practice this in low-stakes environments so that you are prepared when high-stakes crises arrive. For example, if you are stuck in a slow-moving line, instead of checking your phone or huffing in frustration, use that time to practice the pause. Feel the irritation rise, observe it, breathe through it, and choose to remain calm. If someone leaves a mean comment on your social media, wait an hour before responding, or decide not to respond at all. These small victories build the neural pathways of self-control. The power of the pause also extends to how we handle our own internal critics. When a self-defeating thought enters your mind, such as I'm not good enough for this or I'm going to fail, your instinct might be to spiral into anxiety. Here, the pause allows you to intercept the thought before it becomes an emotional state. You pause, you recognize the thought for what it is, a mental event, not a factual truth, and you choose to refocus your attention on the task at hand. You learn to treat your thoughts like passing clouds. You see them, but you don't have to follow them. In conclusion, Chapter 1 is about reclaiming the sovereignty of your mind by reclaiming your time. The world will always provide triggers. People will be difficult, plans will fail, and accidents will happen. You cannot control the stimulus, but you can always control the pause. By committing to this habit, you move from being a reactive participant in your life to being an active creator of your character. You become the person who remains steady while everyone else is losing their footing. This is the foundation of emotional strength, the unwavering ability to stop, breathe, and choose who you want to be in the face of whatever life throws at you. Mastering the pause is the first step toward becoming truly unbreakable. Chapter 2: Radical Acceptance and the Circle of Control. If the pause is the tool that gives you time, then radical acceptance is the philosophy that gives you peace. One of the greatest drains on our emotional reserves is the constant, exhausting habit of arguing with reality. We spend hours, days, and sometimes years of our lives mentally protesting things that have already happened or things that are entirely outside of our influence. We say things like, "It shouldn't be raining today," "They shouldn't have said that to me," or "I can't believe the economy is this bad." While these statements feel like valid expressions of frustration, they are actually forms of emotional leakage. To be emotionally strong, you must master the habit of radical acceptance, the complete and total acceptance of the present moment as it is, without judgment or resistance. Radical acceptance does not mean you approve of what is happening, nor does it mean you are being passive or giving up. There is a vital distinction between acceptance and agreement. You can accept that it is raining without liking the rain. You can accept that someone treated you poorly without excusing their behavior. Acceptance simply means acknowledging the facts of the situation so that you can stop fighting the is and start working with it. When you resist reality, you are like a swimmer trying to push back the tide. You will eventually tire out and drown. When you accept reality, you learn to swim with the current, using your energy to navigate rather than to fight. To implement this in your daily life, you must learn to operate within what psychologists and Stoic philosophers call the circle of control. Imagine two concentric circles. The inner circle, the circle of control, is small. It contains only three things: your thoughts, your intentions, and your actions. Everything else in the universe falls into the outer circle, the circle of influence or concern. This includes the weather, the past, the global economy, the traffic, and most importantly, the thoughts and actions of other people. Emotional fragility comes from trying to force the outer circle to behave the way you want it to. When you tie your happiness to how others treat you or how a specific event turns out, you are handing over your emotional remote control to the world. Emotional strength, however, is built by pulling all your energy back into the inner circle. An emotionally strong person looks at a difficult situation and asks, "What part of this is within my control?" If the answer is nothing, they practice radical acceptance and let it go. If there is a small piece that can be managed, such as their own response or their next step, they focus 100% of their intensity there. Consider the common experience of a professional setback, such as being passed over for a promotion. A reactive person will spend weeks in a state of emotional protest. They will complain to coworkers, replay the meeting in their head, and grow bitter toward the person who got the job. This resistance doesn't change the outcome, it only ruins their current performance and mental health. An emotionally strong person, practicing radical acceptance, acknowledges the reality immediately: I did not get the promotion. That is a fact. They then move to their circle of control. I can ask for feedback to improve, I can update my resume, or I can choose to excel in my current role to prove my value. By accepting the is, they free up the mental bandwidth required to change the will be. This habit also requires us to confront the tyranny of the should. We often suffer more from our expectations of how life should be than from life itself. We believe life should be fair, people should be kind, and hard work should always be rewarded. While these are nice ideals, reality often disagrees. When you cling to should, every deviation from your ideal becomes a source of emotional pain. Radical acceptance teaches you to drop the should and embrace the is. This shift doesn't make you a cynic, it makes you a realist. It allows you to face the world as it actually exists, which is the only place where you can actually make a difference. A practical way to build this habit is through the reality check exercise. When you feel a surge of stress or anger, take a piece of paper and draw two columns. Label the first facts, and the second my protests. In the facts column, write down only what is objectively true, e.g., the car won't start. In the my protests column, write down your emotional resistance, e.g., this always happens to me, I'm going to be late and it's unfair. You will quickly see that the facts are usually manageable, while the protests are what cause the actual suffering. Radical acceptance is the process of crossing out the second column and focusing entirely on the first. Furthermore, radical acceptance is the ultimate cure for the victim mentality. A victim is someone who feels that life is happening to them and that they are powerless to change their state. By accepting responsibility for your internal reaction to external events, you reclaim your power. You realize that while you are not responsible for the stimulus, you are responsible for the processing of that stimulus. This is the hallmark of emotional maturity, the refusal to blame your emotional state on anyone or anything else. In the context of relationships, this habit is transformative. We often try to fix or change the people around us, leading to endless conflict and resentment. Radical acceptance asks you to accept people exactly as they are right now. This doesn't mean you have to stay in a toxic relationship, it means you stop being surprised when people act according to their character. When you accept that a person is who they have shown themselves to be, you stop reacting with shock and start reacting with strategy. You can then decide from a place of calm whether that person belongs in your inner circle or if you need to set a boundary. Finally, we must apply radical acceptance to ourselves. Many of us are our own harshest critics, refusing to accept our mistakes, our perceived flaws, or our past failures. We carry the weight of "I should have known better" like a heavy chain. Emotional strength requires you to accept your past self as a person who was doing the best they could with the tools they had at the time. You cannot change what you did 10 years ago or 10 minutes ago. By accepting your imperfections, you stop the internal war. This peace creates the stable ground necessary for genuine self-improvement. In summary, Chapter 2 teaches us that emotional strength is not about winning a fight against the world, it is about refusing to enter the fight in the first place. By practicing radical acceptance, you conserve your energy. You stop bleeding emotion into things that don't matter and start investing it in the few things that do. You become a person who is grounded in reality, unburdened by shoulds, and empowered by the circle of control. This is the quiet, steady strength of a person who knows that no matter what happens out there, they are in command of what happens in here. Chapter 3, Mastering the Internal Dialogue, the Art of Cognitive Reframing. If Chapter 1 gave you time through the pause, and Chapter 2 gave you peace through radical acceptance, Chapter 3 gives you the tools to reshape your reality from the inside out. There is a silent, relentless voice that narrates every waking second of your life. This internal dialogue, the story you tell yourself about why things are happening, is the primary architect of your emotional state. It is a fundamental truth of psychology that events do not cause emotions, rather, our interpretations of events cause emotions. To be emotionally strong, you must move from being a passive listener of this inner voice to becoming its active editor. You must master the art of cognitive reframing. Most people believe they see the world objectively, like a camera recording a scene. In reality, we see the world through a lens colored by our past experiences, insecurities, and biases. When something happens, a missed deadline, a cold shoulder from a friend, a financial setback, our internal narrator immediately provides a frame for that event. For many, that default frame is negative, catastrophic, or self-defeating. We tell ourselves, I'm a failure, they don't respect me, or this is the end of the world. These frames aren't just descriptions, they are emotional blueprints. If you frame a setback as a catastrophe, your brain will respond with the intensity of a life-threatening emergency. If you frame it as a data point, your brain will respond with curiosity and problem-solving. Cognitive reframing is the habit of intentionally changing the perspective from which you view a situation. It is not about toxic positivity or lying to yourself. It is about finding a more accurate, empowering, and useful way to look at the facts. It is the process of shifting from a threat mindset to a challenge mindset. When you are in a threat mindset, your focus is on what you stand to lose, which triggers anxiety and defensiveness. When you are in a challenge mindset, your focus is on what you can learn or how you can grow, which triggers focus and resilience. The first step in mastering your internal dialogue is to identify cognitive distortions. These are habitual ways of thinking that are common but highly irrational. One of the most damaging is catastrophizing, taking a small negative event and imagining it will lead to a chain of disasters. For example, making a mistake on a report leads to thoughts of being fired, which leads to thoughts of being homeless. Another is personalization, believing that everything others do is a direct reaction to you, e.g., my friend didn't text back because they are mad at me. By labeling these distortions as they happen, you strip them of their authority. When you catch yourself catastrophizing, you can literally say to yourself, this is just a distorted thought, not a future reality. Once you have identified a negative frame, the second step is to cross-examine the thought. Emotionally strong people treat their thoughts like hypotheses rather than facts. Ask yourself, is there actual evidence for this thought? Is there another possible explanation for why this happened? And is this thought helping me solve the problem? Most of the time, our most painful thoughts fail this cross-examination. For instance, if you believe a colleague is out to get you, you might find that the evidence is actually quite thin. Perhaps they are simply stressed or have a different communication style. By deconstructing the false narrative, the negative emotion associated with it begins to dissolve. Reframing is particularly powerful when dealing with failure. A person with a weak emotional foundation views failure as a permanent stain on their identity. Their internal dialogue says, I failed because I am not enough. An emotionally strong person reframes failure as essential feedback. They tell themselves, I failed because my current strategy was incorrect, and now I have the information I need to adjust. This shift changes the emotion from shame to determination. Thomas Edison famously reframed his thousands of failed attempts at the light bulb not as failures, but as finding 10,000 ways that won't work. That is the power of a superior internal frame. Another essential reframe is the shift from have to get to. Much of our daily stress comes from the perceived burden of our responsibilities. We say, I have to go to work, I have to deal with this difficult client, or I have to go to the gym. This language frames our lives as a series of impositions, which leads to a feeling of resentment and exhaustion. By simply changing one word, I get to go to work, I get to solve this problem, I get to move my body, you reframe your responsibilities as opportunities. This isn't just wordplay, it creates a physiological shift in your body, moving you from a state of being burdened to a state of being grateful and empowered. To make this a habit, you must practice narrative auditing. Throughout the day, especially when you feel a dip in your mood, stop and ask, what is the story I am telling myself right now? If you find a narrative of victimhood, bitterness, or helplessness, challenge yourself to find 3 alternative frames. For example, if you are stuck in traffic and feeling angry, your default frame is, this traffic is ruining my day. An alternative frame could be, this is an extra 20 minutes to listen to my favorite audiobook. Another could be, this is an opportunity to practice my breathing and patience. By forcing your brain to find multiple perspectives, you break the monopoly of the negative thought. Mastering the internal dialogue also means learning to speak to yourself with objective compassion. Many people have an inner critic that says things to them they would never say to a friend. This harshness doesn't make you stronger, it makes you more fragile by constantly eroding your self-worth. Objective compassion is not about making excuses, it's about being fair. When you make a mistake, instead of I'm an idiot, try I made a mistake because I was rushing, I need to slow down next time. This is objective, the mistake happened, and compassionate, it focuses on the behavior, not the personhood. Finally, understand that you are the observer of your thoughts, not the thoughts themselves. Just as you can watch a movie without becoming the characters on the screen, you can watch your internal dialogue without being defined by it. You are the consciousness that hears the voice. By creating this distance, you gain the high ground of emotional strength. You can see a negative thought arrive, acknowledge its presence, and choose not to give it a seat at the table. In summary, Chapter 3 teaches us that our words create our worlds. By mastering your internal dialogue and practicing cognitive reframing, you gain the power to change your emotional experience at will. You stop being a victim of your default settings, and start designing a mental environment that supports resilience, growth, and peace. You realize that while you cannot control the cards you are dealt, you have total control over how you describe the game. This mental flexibility is the hallmark of a truly educated and emotionally strong individual. Chapter 4: Building an Identity of Competence and Self-Trust. Emotional strength is often viewed as a shield, something that protects you from the world. But more accurately, it is an internal foundation. If your sense of self is built on the shifting sands of other people's opinions or temporary successes, your emotions will always be unstable. To be truly resilient, you must develop an identity of competence. This is the deep-seated, unshakable belief that you are capable of handling whatever life throws at you. It is not about knowing you will always win, it is about knowing you will not be destroyed if you lose. This chapter focuses on the habit of building self-trust through evidence-based competence. Most people suffer from a self-trust gap. They make promises to themselves, to wake up earlier, to eat better, to finish a project, to keep their temper, and then they break those promises. Each time you break a commitment to yourself, your subconscious mind takes a note. It begins to view you as unreliable. Consequently, when a crisis hits, you feel anxious and overwhelmed because deep down, you don't trust the person in charge of handling it. You don't trust yourself. Building an identity of competence is the process of closing this gap by accumulating what we call small wins. An identity is not something you find through meditation or journaling alone, it is something you build through action. Every act of discipline is a vote for the person you wish to become. When you decide to go to the gym despite being tired, you are casting a vote for a disciplined person. When you choose to stay calm during a heated argument, you are casting a vote for an emotionally strong person. Over time, the weight of these votes creates a body of evidence that your brain cannot ignore. You no longer have to try to be confident, you simply are confident because you have proof of your own reliability. This habit requires a shift from seeking external validation to seeking internal credibility. In our digital age, we are trained to look for likes, views, and praise to tell us we are doing well. This is an emotionally dangerous strategy. If your self-esteem is provided by others, it can be taken away by others. An emotionally strong person prioritizes their own internal scorecard. They ask, did I live up to my own standards today? Did I keep my word to myself? When you value your own opinion of yourself more than the opinions of strangers, you become emotionally untouchable. You develop a quiet confidence that doesn't need to shout or prove itself. Building competence also means leaning into productive discomfort. Many people are emotionally fragile because they have spent their lives avoiding anything that makes them feel inadequate or clumsy. They stay within their comfort zone, which is actually a prison for growth. To build an identity of strength, you must intentionally do things that are difficult. Whether it's learning a complex new skill, speaking in public, or engaging in intense physical training, these activities force you to face the possibility of failure. When you fail, and then you get back up and try again, you are teaching your nervous system that failure is not fatal. This realization is the bedrock of self-trust. Furthermore, an identity of competence is built on self-efficacy, the belief in your ability to execute the behaviors necessary to produce specific performance attainments. You build this by setting micro goals. If you want to be more emotionally stable, don't start by trying to remain calm during a major life crisis. Start by remaining calm when you drop a glass of water or when your internet connection is slow. Treat these minor irritations as training sets for your mind. As you successfully navigate these small challenges, your self-efficacy grows. You begin to tell yourself, I handled that well, I can handle the next thing too. Another vital component of this habit is the competence over comfort mindset. When faced with a decision, the reactive mind asks, what is the easiest path? The emotionally strong mind asks, what path will build my skill and character? Choosing the harder path, the one that requires more discipline or honesty, is a massive deposit into your self-trust bank account. Over time, this transforms your self-image. You stop seeing yourself as someone who copes with life and start seeing yourself as someone who masters it. We must also address the imposter syndrome that often arises during this process. As you start building a stronger identity, your old fragile self will often protest. It will tell you that you are faking it, or that you aren't really this strong person. The way to defeat this is through relentless consistency. Repetition is the language of the subconscious. If you act with strength consistently for 6 months, the old identity will eventually starve to death from a lack of evidence. You don't fake it until you make it. You track it until you act it. You look at the data of your recent actions, and you allow that data to define who you are. Finally, an identity of competence allows for grace under pressure. Because you trust yourself, you don't feel the need to panic when things go wrong. You know that you have a toolkit of habits, the pause, radical acceptance, and reframing, and you trust your ability to use them. This self-trust acts as a shock absorber for the soul. It allows you to stay present in the moment rather than spiraling into what-if scenarios. You know that no matter what happens, you will find a way, because you always have. In summary, Chapter 4 teaches us that emotional strength is the byproduct of a life lived with integrity and effort. By focusing on building an identity of competence, you move from a state of self-doubt to a state of self-certainty. You stop looking for a hero to save you and realize that you have become the hero you were waiting for. This deep-seated self-trust is the ultimate emotional anchor, keeping you steady when the winds of life are at their most violent. Chapter 5. The Role of Stoic Equanimity, the Unshakable Mind. In our journey toward emotional strength, we have learned to pause, to accept reality, to reframe our thoughts, and to build self-trust. Now, we reach the pinnacle of emotional regulation, the practice of equanimity. Derived from the Latin words equus, even, and animus, mind, equanimity is the habit of maintaining a psychological stability and composure that is undisturbed by experience, whether that experience is good or bad. In the classical philosophy of Stoicism, this was the ultimate goal. The Stoics believed that a person's peace should never be a hostage to fortune. To be emotionally strong is to be like a mountain. The weather changes, storms batter the peaks, and the sun eventually shines, but the mountain remains unmoved. Most people live in a state of emotional pendulum. When something positive happens, a compliment, a windfall, or a victory, their pendulum swings high into euphoria. When something negative happens, a criticism, a loss, or a delay, the pendulum swings violently into despair or rage. While feeling joy is wonderful, this extreme oscillation makes you fragile. If your highs are entirely dependent on external events, your lows will be equally extreme when those events inevitably vanish. Equanimity is the practice of shortening the swing of that pendulum. It is the ability to enjoy the good times without becoming addicted to them, and to endure the bad times without being crushed by them. The foundation of equanimity is the internalization of the goal. Most people set outcome goals. They want to win the game, get the job, or be liked by a specific person. Because these outcomes are never 100% within our control, they create constant anxiety. The emotionally strong person sets process goals. Instead of I must win this negotiation, they say, I will be as prepared, honest, and calm as possible during this negotiation. If they do that, they have succeeded, regardless of the final deal. By tethering your success to your own behavior rather than the world's reaction, you create a state of unbeatable peace. You can be satisfied with yourself even when the world is disappointed in you. A key Stoic technique for building this evenness of mind is premeditatio malorum, or the premeditation of evils. While modern self-help often tells us to think only positive thoughts, the Stoics knew that the shock of a negative event is what causes the most emotional damage. Equanimity is built by periodically and calmly reflecting on potential challenges. You ask yourself, what if I lose my job? What if this project fails? What if people criticize me? You aren't being morbid, you are rehearsing your resilience. You are deciding in advance that you will be okay even if the worst happens. This removes the power of surprise and allows you to face the world with a sense of fearless readiness. Another vital aspect of equanimity is the view from above. We often get caught in micro-emotions. We are upset about a typo, a rude comment, or a broken appliance. These things feel massive because we are looking at them through a magnifying glass. To regain your composure, you must zoom out. Imagine looking at your current problem from the height of a skyscraper, then from a satellite, then from the perspective of a century. In the grand scheme of your life, and certainly in the history of the world, this moment is a tiny speck. This shift in perspective doesn't minimize your problems, but it puts them in their proper place. It allows you to breathe and realize that this too shall pass. Equanimity also requires us to beware of false judgments. We often label events as good or bad the moment they happen. However, we rarely know the full story. A bad event, like a car breakdown, might prevent you from being in a much worse accident further down the road. A good event, like winning the lottery, often leads to isolation and ruin. The emotionally strong person resists the urge to label. They use the phrase, "It is what it is, and I will make the best of it." By refusing to judge events immediately, you stay in a neutral, powerful state of mind where you can act effectively rather than reacting emotionally. This habit is particularly useful in social interactions. We often let the moods of others infect us. If a coworker is stressed and snappy, we become stressed and snappy. This is known as emotional contagion. Equanimity acts as a psychological firewall. You recognize that another person's anger is a reflection of their internal state, not a definition of your worth. You can observe their storm without letting it rain inside your own mind. You can even offer them compassion, because you realize they are suffering from a lack of the very emotional strength you are currently building. Practicing equanimity in the modern world also means managing your dopamine loops. Our phones and social media are designed to keep us in a state of constant emotional arousal, excitement, outrage, envy, and fear. To have an even mind, you must have periods of digital silence. You must learn to be bored, to be still, and to be alone with your thoughts. If you cannot sit in a quiet room for 10 minutes without reaching for a distraction, you do not have equanimity, you have a dependency. True strength is found in the ability to be still while the world is spinning. Furthermore, equanimity is the parent of grace. It is the ability to be the calmest person in the room during a crisis. When everyone else is panicking, the person with equanimity is the one looking for solutions. They can do this because they aren't wasting energy on "why is this happening?" or "this is so unfair." They have accepted the situation and are focused entirely on their next right move. This makes them natural leaders and reliable partners. In summary, Chapter 5 teaches us that the highest form of emotional strength is the even mind. By practicing the internalization of goals, the view from above, and the avoidance of hasty judgments, you become psychologically weatherproof. You stop being a victim of the highs and lows, and start living from a stable, centered core. You realize that your peace is a fortress, and while the world may knock on the door, it can only enter if you choose to open it. Chapter 6: Emotional Granularity, the Science of Precision. To control your emotions, you must first be able to identify them with the precision of a surgeon. Most people navigate their internal lives using a very limited and blunt emotional vocabulary. They experience life through broad categories. They feel good, bad, mad, sad, or stressed. However, attempting to manage your psychological well-being with such generic labels is like a doctor trying to treat every physical ailment, from a broken bone to a viral infection, with a single generic aspirin. To develop true emotional strength, you must master the habit of emotional granularity. This is the ability to identify, label, and differentiate your specific emotional states with high levels of nuance and accuracy. The concept of emotional granularity was pioneered by neuroscientist Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, whose research suggests that emotions are not reactions that happen to us, but constructions made by our brains. Your brain takes in physical sensations from your body, like a racing heart or a knotted stomach, and looks at the context of your environment to guess what emotion you are feeling. If you have a limited vocabulary of emotional concepts, your brain will constantly guess the same few things. If the only negative concept you have is anger, your brain will categorize every instance of frustration, resentment, betrayal, impatience, and indignation under that one heavy explosive label. This makes the emotion feel monolithic, overwhelming, and impossible to manage. However, when you increase your granularity, you break that big, scary emotional block into smaller, more manageable threads. The simple act of affect labeling, giving a specific name to a feeling, has a profound physiological effect on the brain. Brain imaging studies show that when a person precisely labels a negative emotion, the activity in the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm center, decreases, while activity in the prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic and regulation, increases. By naming the monster, you strip it of its power. You shift from being submerged in the feeling to being an observer of the feeling. You move from the passenger seat of your emotional life into the driver's seat. Think of emotional granularity as a high-resolution navigation tool. Imagine you are lost in a dense forest. If your map is blurry and only has one word printed on it, forest, it provides you with zero utility for finding your way out. But if your map is high-resolution, showing specific trails, types of trees, elevation markers, and water sources, you can plot a precise course to safety. Similarly, if you know you aren't just sad, but actually feeling wistful, a bittersweet yearning for the past, or disappointed, the gap between a specific expectation and reality, you can apply the correct solution. You don't treat wistfulness the same way you treat disappointment. One requires reflection and gratitude, the other requires a shift in future expectations and planning. To build this habit, you must treat your internal world like a new language you are learning to speak. You must expand your emotional vocabulary beyond the basics. For example, consider the broad category of fear. High granularity allows you to distinguish between anxiety, worry about a future uncertainty, trepidation, fear of a specific upcoming event, horror, a reaction to something gruesome, and dread, the sense of an unavoidable negative outcome. Each of these requires a different internal response. Anxiety might be solved by information gathering, dread might be solved by radical acceptance, trepidation might be solved by the power of the pause. Without precision, you are just a person in fear, reacting blindly to a vague threat. A practical and highly effective exercise for increasing granularity is the triple label technique. When you feel a surge of negativity or a heavy mood, do not settle for the first word that comes to mind. Challenge yourself to find 3 distinct, nuanced words that describe the specific flavors of that moment. For example, instead of saying, "I'm stressed about work," you might analyze the feeling and realize, "I am feeling overwhelmed by the volume of tasks, inadequate because I lack a specific skill for this project, and unappreciated because my boss hasn't acknowledged my overtime." By separating these 3 threads, the stress is no longer a giant, untouchable cloud. It is now 3 specific problems with 3 specific solutions. You can delegate or prioritize to reduce the overwhelm, you can ask for training or research to fix the feeling of inadequacy, and you can have a direct conversation or adjust your internal scorecard to handle the feeling of being unappreciated. Precision leads to clarity, and clarity is the prerequisite for effective action. Furthermore, emotional granularity prevents emotional contagion. When you lack precision, you are more likely to catch the vague moods of those around you. If your partner is in a bad mood, you might unconsciously mirror that bad mood. But if you have high granularity, you can look at them and think, they aren't just mad, they are feeling exhausted and undervalued. This precision allows you to remain empathetic without becoming infected by their emotion. It keeps your psychological boundaries sharp. This habit also plays a massive role in your physical health. People with high emotional granularity have been shown to go to the doctor less frequently, use less medication, and have shorter hospital stays. This is likely because they can distinguish between emotional distress and physical pain. A person with low granularity might experience the heaviness of grief as actual chest pain or the acid of anxiety as a chronic stomach ailment. By labeling the emotion correctly, they prevent the mind from somatizing the stress, turning a mental feeling into a physical disease. In the context of your YouTube channel and the content you create, this chapter is a call to become an architect of the inner self. You are teaching your listeners that their dark moods are not signs of weakness, but signs of a lack of data. By educating themselves on the nuances of their feelings, they gain a level of self-control that most people will never know. They move from a black and white emotional existence into a world of high-definition color, where every feeling, no matter how painful, is a source of information rather than a source of suffering. In summary, Chapter 6 teaches us that knowledge is power is not just a cliché, it is a neurological fact. By developing emotional granularity, you stop being a victim of vague, heavy moods. You become a master observer of your internal landscape, capable of identifying exactly what you feel so that you can decide exactly what to do. This precision is the hallmark of an educated, emotionally strong individual. It is the bridge between being driven by your feelings and driving them toward the life you want to lead. Chapter 7: Developing a High Frustration Tolerance, the Art of Voluntary Hardship. In our modern era, we are surrounded by the architecture of convenience. We have instant communication, fast food, and entertainment available at the swipe of a finger. While these advancements have made life easier, they have also created an unintended side effect: a significant decline in our frustration tolerance. Because we rarely have to wait or endure discomfort, our emotional muscles have become atrophied. When we face a genuine obstacle, a delayed flight, a slow-moving bureaucracy, or a difficult learning curve, we often react with a level of distress that is entirely disproportionate to the situation. To be emotionally strong, you must intentionally reverse this trend. You must develop a high frustration tolerance through the practice of voluntary hardship. Frustration tolerance is the ability to endure a delay in gratification or a period of discomfort without losing your emotional center. It is the capacity to stay in the game when things are not going your way. People with low frustration tolerance are often described as fragile. They give up easily, they lash out when inconvenienced, and they avoid challenges that don't offer immediate rewards. On the other hand, emotionally strong individuals possess a psychological callus. They have taught their nervous systems that discomfort is not an emergency, and that frustration is merely a sign of progress in disguise. The habit of voluntary hardship is the strategic use of minor, self-imposed challenges to harden your emotional resilience. Think of it like a vaccine. By exposing yourself to a small, controlled amount of a pathogen discomfort, you build the antibodies necessary to survive a major infection, a life crisis. If you never push yourself, the first time life pushes back, you will break. But if you are someone who regularly seeks out the hard path, you develop a sense of inner ruggedness that carries over into every area of your life. One of the most effective ways to practice this is through physical discipline. Whether it is a cold shower, a long run in the rain, or holding a difficult yoga pose, these physical acts are actually mental training sessions. When your body screams, "Stop, this is uncomfortable," and you calmly decide to stay for another 2 minutes, you are training your prefrontal cortex to override your primitive impulses. You are proving to yourself that you are the master of your sensations, not their slave. This builds a deep, quiet confidence. When a stressful situation arises at work later that day, your brain recognizes the sensation of frustration and says, "I know this feeling. I've handled worse than this." We stay calm and keep moving. Another essential practice is delayed gratification. In a world of buy now, pay later, choosing to wait is a radical act of emotional strength. Make it a habit to delay small pleasures. If you want a snack, wait 30 minutes. If you want to check your notifications, finish your current task first. These micro-delays build the neural circuitry of self-control. They teach you that your impulses are suggestions, not commands. This habit is the ultimate predictor of long-term success. Those who can navigate the frustration of the waiting period are the ones who eventually reap the greatest rewards. We must also change our relationship with the learning curve. Most people feel frustrated when they aren't immediately good at something new. This frustration is actually cognitive friction, the brain's way of signaling that it is rewiring itself. Emotionally strong people reframe this friction. Instead of thinking, "I'm bad at this, this is annoying," they think, "My brain is currently growing because I am doing something difficult." By accepting the frustration of being a beginner, you unlock the ability to master any skill. You become unstoppable because you are no longer afraid of the feeling of being stuck. Voluntary hardship also includes social hardship. This means having the difficult conversation you've been avoiding, or placing yourself in social situations where you feel slightly out of place. It involves the habit of speaking the truth when it's uncomfortable, rather than taking the easy path of a white lie or silence. Every time you choose the hard social path because it is the right one, your emotional strength doubles. You realize that you can survive the temporary discomfort of someone else's disapproval, which is one of the most liberating realizations a human can have. Furthermore, a high frustration tolerance allows you to practice productive persistence. Most breakthroughs in life happen just past the point where most people would have quit. If you have a low tolerance for frustration, you will always stop just short of the finish line. If you have a high tolerance, you view the wall not as a sign to stop, but as a test of your resolve. You learn to embrace the suck, knowing that the discomfort is the price of entry for anything meaningful. A practical way to implement this is the 5-minute rule. When you are working on a frustrating task and you feel the overwhelming urge to quit, commit to staying for exactly 5 more minutes. During those 5 minutes, focus entirely on the process, not the outcome. Often, you will find that the peak of the frustration passes during that window, and you gain a second wind. Even if you do quit after 5 minutes, you have successfully exercised your tolerance muscle. You have proven that you decide when to stop, not your frustration. In summary, Chapter 7 teaches us that comfort is a beautiful place, but nothing ever grows there. By intentionally seeking out voluntary hardship and building a high frustration tolerance, you prepare yourself for the inevitable storms of life. You stop being a fair weather person and become someone who can thrive in any climate. You realize that frustration is not a signal to retreat, but a signal to engage more deeply. This ruggedness is the backbone of emotional strength. It is the grit that allows you to turn obstacles into stepping stones and pain into power. Chapter 8: The Boundary Habit: Protecting Your Emotional Fortress. We often think of emotional strength as an internal struggle, a battle with our own thoughts and reactions. However, a significant portion of our emotional stability is determined by what we allow into our lives from the outside. You can practice the pause, radical acceptance, and equanimity all day, but if your environment is constantly leaking toxic energy or unreasonable demands, you will eventually burn out. Emotional strength is impossible without the boundary habit. To be emotionally strong, you must view your mental and emotional energy as a finite, precious resource that requires a fortress to protect it. A boundary is not a wall used to shut the world out. It is a gateway that defines what is allowed in. It is the clear line where you end and the rest of the world begins. People with weak boundaries often suffer from emotional porosity. They absorb the stress of their coworkers, the anger of their partners, and the demands of their social circles as if they were their own. They feel guilty for saying no, and responsible for everyone else's happiness. This is a recipe for emotional fragility. True strength lies in the ability to say, "This is my responsibility, and that is yours." The most fundamental boundary is the one you set with your time and your yes. Many of us are people pleasers by default. We agree to projects, favors, and social outings not because we want to, but because we fear the discomfort of someone else's disappointment. Every time you say yes to something you don't value, you are saying no to your own peace of mind. An emotionally strong person understands that no is a complete sentence. You do not owe the world an essay-length explanation for why you are protecting your time. By setting firm boundaries on your commitments, you ensure that when you do say yes, you have the emotional bandwidth to be fully present and effective. Another critical area for boundaries is information intake. In the digital age, we are bombarded with outrage bait, tragic news, and the curated perfect lives of others on social media. This constant influx of data is designed to trigger your emotions. If you do not set a boundary with your devices, you are allowing billion-dollar algorithms to dictate your mood. Emotional strength requires digital minimalism. It means choosing when and how you engage with the world's chaos. It means realizing that being informed does not require being constantly distressed. By limiting your intake, you preserve your emotional capital for the things that actually happen in your real physical life. We must also set boundaries with toxic personalities. There are individuals who function as emotional vampires. They thrive on drama, constant complaining, or subtle manipulation. If you allow these people unrestricted access to your ears and your heart, they will drain your resilience. Setting a boundary here doesn't always mean cutting someone off entirely. It means defining the terms of the engagement. It might mean saying, "I can only talk for 10 minutes, or I'm not willing to discuss this topic with you anymore." You are not being mean, you are being stewards of your own mental health. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and you cannot help anyone if you are emotionally depleted by their drama. The most difficult boundary to set, however, is often with our own internalized expectations. We often have a mental board of directors, made up of the voices of parents, teachers, and society, telling us who we should be. If you are living your life to fulfill someone else's definition of success, you will always feel a sense of emotional dissonance and anxiety. Emotional strength involves setting a boundary against these external voices and deciding on your own values. It is the courage to be disliked by those whose values do not align with your own. When you are grounded in your own principles, the criticism of others loses its sting. A major obstacle to setting boundaries is the feeling of guilt. We often feel that being strong means being limitless, that we should be able to handle everything for everyone. You must reframe this. A person without boundaries is not a hero, they are a casualty waiting to happen. Guilt is often just the growing pains of a new boundary. When you first start saying no or setting limits, people who benefited from your lack of boundaries will push back. They may call you selfish or different. This is the test of your emotional strength. If you can endure the temporary discomfort of their disapproval, you win your freedom. A practical way to implement this is the internal green room technique. Before you enter a high-stress environment or a difficult conversation, imagine yourself in a calm, protected room. Decide in advance what you will allow to pass through the door. I will listen to the feedback, but I will not allow personal insults to enter. I will discuss the project, but I will not take on the guilt of the missed deadline that wasn't mine. By presetting your boundaries, you prevent yourself from being blindsided and reacting emotionally in the moment. In summary, Chapter 8 teaches us that emotional strength is as much about what you don't do as what you do. By practicing the boundary habit, you stop the leakage of your mental energy. You create a protected space where your inner peace can grow undisturbed. You move from being a reactive sponge to being a selective filter. This clarity allows you to focus your strength where it truly matters, ensuring that your emotional fortress remains standing no matter how hard the world knocks at the gate. Chapter 9: Turning Pain into Purpose, the Alchemy of Resilience. In the previous chapters, we focused on managing daily stressors and protecting your energy. However, true emotional strength is ultimately tested not by the minor inconveniences of life, but by its genuine tragedies: loss, betrayal, failure, and grief. While the goal of many is to avoid pain at all costs, the emotionally strong individual understands a deeper truth: pain is inevitable, but suffering is often optional. The highest level of emotional mastery is the habit of meaning-making, or turning pain into purpose. This is the psychological phenomenon known as post-traumatic growth. Most people view pain as a dead end. When a hardship occurs, they ask, "Why did this happen to me?" This question leads to a cycle of victimhood and bitterness. It keeps the mind anchored in the past, replaying the event with a sense of helplessness. Emotional strength requires shifting the question from "Why did this happen?" to "What can I build with this?" This is not about being happy that something bad occurred, it is about refusing to let that event be for nothing. It is the process of taking the raw, chaotic energy of pain and refining it into the fuel for your future self. Think of pain as a form of energy. If you try to suppress it or push it away, it doesn't disappear, it simply goes underground, manifesting as chronic anxiety, anger, or physical illness. But if you channel that energy into a purpose, whether it's helping others who are going through the same thing, starting a new project, or deepening your own character, the pain begins to transform. You are no longer just a person who suffered, you are a person who learned. You are a person who has something to offer the world that you didn't have before the trial. One of the most powerful ways to turn pain into purpose is through the lens of service. When we are in pain, our focus tends to become microscopic. We can only see our own hurt. This self-focus actually amplifies the suffering. By expanding your focus to include others, you break the spell of the pain. If you have survived a financial crisis, you have unique wisdom to share with those currently struggling. If you have dealt with a health battle, you have a level of empathy that can comfort others in the same position. By using your scars to guide someone else, you give those scars a reason for existing. Another aspect of this habit is the integration of the shadow. Emotional strength involves acknowledging the darker parts of your experience, the anger, the shame, and the regret, and finding a place for them in your identity. In the Japanese art of kintsugi, broken pottery is repaired with gold, making the seams visible and beautiful. The vessel is considered more valuable because it was broken and repaired. Similarly, your life's cracks are not flaws to be hidden, they are the parts of you that possess the most character. An emotionally strong person doesn't claim to be perfect, they claim to be repaired. This process also requires the habit of radical responsibility. Even if you were not responsible for the event that caused the pain, you are 100% responsible for the recovery. Waiting for an apology that may never come, or for the world to make it right, is a form of emotional imprisonment. Purpose is found when you decide that you are the architect of your own healing. You take the broken bricks of your experience and use them to build a foundation for a version of yourself that is wiser, more compassionate, and more focused on what truly matters. Turning pain into purpose also changes your relationship with the future. Many people live in fear of what might happen next. But when you have a track record of transforming past hardships into growth, that fear diminishes. You begin to trust your alchemy. You realize that while you cannot prevent the storms, you have the ability to build a better ship every time one passes. This creates a sense of anti-fragility, a state where you don't just survive stress, but you actually get better because of it. To practice this daily, look back at a past difficulty that still carries an emotional sting. Ask yourself, what did this experience teach me that I couldn't have learned any other way? And how has this made me more capable of helping others? By finding even one small piece of utility in a negative event, you begin to dissolve the power that event has over you. You are no longer a victim of your history, you are the author of your legacy. In summary, Chapter 9 teaches us that the greatest tragedies of our lives can also become our greatest teachers. By refusing to let your pain go to waste, you reach the highest level of emotional strength. You become someone who can walk through fire and come out not just unburned but forged. This is the ultimate victory of the human spirit, the ability to take the worst that life has to offer and use it to become your best self. Chapter 10: The Discipline of Daily Recovery, Sustaining the Unbreakable Mind. We have journeyed through the habits of the mind, the boundaries of the soul, and the alchemy of the spirit. But emotional strength is not a trophy you win once and keep forever on a shelf. It is a living, breathing state of being that requires daily maintenance. Just as a world-class athlete cannot perform at their peak without a rigorous recovery protocol, you cannot maintain emotional sovereignty if your internal battery is constantly depleted. The final habit of the emotionally strong is the discipline of daily recovery. To be truly resilient, you must respect the biological and psychological limits of your nervous system. We live in a culture that glorifies the grind, a state of being always on, always connected, and always productive. From an emotional standpoint, this is a recipe for disaster. When your nervous system is trapped in a state of chronic arousal, constantly responding to pings, deadlines, and social pressures, you lose the ability to use the pause. You become irritable, your perspective narrows, and you slip back into the reactive stimulus-response loop we discussed in Chapter 1. Emotional strength is built in the moments of action, but it is restored in the moments of stillness. The first pillar of recovery is neurological rest. Your brain needs periods where it is not processing new information. In our digital age, we often mistake distraction for rest. Scrolling through social media or watching a loud, fast-paced video is not rest, it is high-intensity data processing. True recovery requires low-stimulus environments. This could be a 20-minute walk without headphones, 10 minutes of seated meditation, or simply staring out a window. These moments allow your brain to move from the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, to the parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest. Without this transition, your emotional skin becomes thin, and even minor irritations feel like major assaults. The second pillar is physiological foundation. It is a hard truth that your emotions are deeply tied to your biology. You cannot be emotionally strong if you are chronically sleep-deprived, malnourished, or sedentary. Sleep, in particular, is the brain's janitor. It is during sleep that the brain processes the emotional events of the day and flushes out metabolic waste. One night of poor sleep can increase the reactivity of your amygdala by up to 60%. If you want to control your emotions, you must first control your sleep environment and your schedule. You are not weak if you feel overwhelmed after 4 hours of sleep, you are simply human. Strength starts with honoring your body's basic needs. The third pillar is the shutdown ritual. Most people carry the stress of their workday into their evening, and the stress of their personal lives into their sleep. To prevent this, you need a clear boundary between doing and being. Create a ritual at the end of each day where you mentally close the books. Reflect on your emotional wins. Where did I use the pause today? Where did I practice radical acceptance? Reflect on your losses without judgment. Where did I lose my center, and what can I learn from it? By consciously reviewing the day, you prevent emotional residue from accumulating and turning into long-term burnout. Furthermore, daily recovery involves the habit of emotional venting. Strength does not mean holding everything inside. An emotionally strong person knows how to pressure release their feelings in a healthy way. This could be through deep conversation with a trusted friend, intensive physical exercise, or the habit of daily journaling. Writing your feelings down on paper externalizes them. It takes them out of your head and puts them in front of your eyes. This simple act reduces the emotional load you are carrying, making it much easier to maintain your equanimity during the day. We must also practice intentional joy. Often, in the pursuit of self-improvement and strength, we become too serious. We treat life like a grim battle to be won. But play, laughter, and connection are vital forms of emotional recovery. They provide the positive friction that keeps our spirits from becoming brittle. Make it a non-negotiable part of your routine to engage in something purely for the sake of enjoyment. This isn't wasting time, it is recharging the fortress. A person who knows how to play is a person who is much harder to break. Finally, understand that consistency is more important than intensity. You do not need a week-long silent retreat to find peace. You need 5 minutes of silence every single day. You do not need a perfect life to be emotionally strong. You need a perfect commitment to your recovery habits. Emotional strength is the result of what you do every day, not what you do once in a while. It is a lifelong practice of returning to your center over and over again. In summary, Chapter 10 reminds us that the mind is a finite resource. By practicing the discipline of daily recovery, prioritizing sleep, limiting stimulation, and honoring your biological needs, you ensure that your emotional strength is sustainable. You move from a state of survival to a state of mastery. You have now been educated on the best habits to control your emotions. You have the tools, the philosophy, and the strategy. The only thing left is the practice. Go forth and build your unbreakable mind. The world needs your strength, your calm, and your sovereign spirit. This concludes your full audiobook script. Every chapter has been designed to meet your target of approximately 1,000 words, totaling an 11-part script, intro plus 10 chapters, perfect for a long-form YouTube documentary or audiobook series. Executive Summary: The Blueprint for Emotional Sovereignty. Emotional strength is not the absence of feeling, nor is it a personality trait reserved for a lucky few. It is a specific, trainable skill set rooted in the mastery of one's internal landscape. This audiobook has outlined a comprehensive 10-step framework for transitioning from a state of emotional reactivity, where the world dictates your mood, to a state of emotional sovereignty, where you remain the master of your own peace. The journey toward an unbreakable mind is built on 3 pillars: awareness, acceptance, and action. The foundation of this transformation begins with awareness. Through the power of the pause and emotional granularity, we learn to interrupt the automatic fight or flight responses of the brain. By expanding the space between a stimulus and our response, we regain the power of choice. When we label our emotions with precision, we move from being submerged in a feeling to becoming an objective observer of it. This shift from "I am angry" to "I am experiencing anger" is the first step toward true regulation. The second pillar is acceptance. Much of our emotional exhaustion is caused by arguing with reality. By practicing radical acceptance, we stop wasting energy on things outside our circle of control, such as the past, the weather, or the opinions of others. Instead, we pull our power back to our own thoughts and actions. Through Stoic equanimity, we learn to maintain an even mind, realizing that our peace is a fortress that can only be breached if we allow it. We stop viewing the world through the tyranny of should, and start engaging with the world as it actually exists. The final pillar is action. Emotional strength is forged through the mastery of internal dialogue and the building of competence. We learn to reframe our hardships as challenges rather than threats. We intentionally seek out voluntary hardship to increase our frustration tolerance, ensuring that we are weatherproof when real crises arrive. By setting firm boundaries, we protect our mental energy, and by turning pain into purpose, we ensure that no setback is ever wasted. We conclude with the discipline of daily recovery, acknowledging that resilience is a renewable resource that must be maintained through sleep, stillness, and self-care. Ultimately, being emotionally strong means becoming the architect of your own character. It is the realization that while you cannot control the wind, you can always adjust your sails. By implementing these 10 habits, you move beyond mere coping and enter a state of anti-fragility, where you don't just survive the pressures of life, but you actually get better because of them. This is the path to a life of meaning, stability, and unshakable inner strength.